First of all, thank you very much to the Society for inviting me to talk about this book, and thank you all very, very much for coming to this wonderful venue with, perhaps you'll have noticed, this fantastic ceiling above us, which curiously, by one of those coincidences, has something to do with the number 16, about which I'll be saying quite a lot. So the title of my talk is The Secrets of Voyaging, Discovering the Mysteries of Being. And actually, when I heard somebody say this was the title of my talk today, I heard another word, Discovering the Mysteries of Being Human. So that's the subtitle. Technology. In celebration of the 850th anniversary of Ibn Arabi's birth, I also want to begin by speaking in Italian, in honor of MIAS Latina, our sisters and brothers in the Mediterranean area. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la dritta via era smarrita. In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself astray in a dark wood, where the straight road had been lost sight of. This is Seamus Heaney's translation of the first opening lines of Dante's remarkable poem, La Commedia Divina. And they plunge the reader into the beginning of a great journey down into the inferno of hell for the ascent through purgatory into paradise. These three lines must be some of the most quoted in the history of literature. They conjure up that particular feeling which can strike any of us at a certain juncture, being astray in a dark wood, the feeling that we've lost our bearings in life. We have no sense of meaning. We're in need of a guide. In the case of Dante, he finds Virgil, whom he takes as his guide for the first part of the journey, until he finds his beloved Beatrice to guide him through paradise. As Virgil explains to Dante, he himself cannot travel that far because the Lord who rules above does not wish me to enter his city, because I was rebellious to his law. He is Lord everywhere, but there he rules. There is his city and his high throne. Oh, happy is he whom he chooses to go there. In our case, we here have taken the great Andalusian master Ibn Arabi as our guide into the mysteries of being, someone whose whole life was taken up with the divine in the most remarkable manner, and whose writings form one of the greatest resources for a vision of our true humanity. His guides are the prophetic figures that he mentions so often and so eloquently, prophets who are for him just as spiritually active now as they were in their time. And despite the fact that most people here do not appear to share a common earthly language with Ibn Arabi, nonetheless, Ibn Arabi can speak to any of us directly in the language of the heart. However, as many others have noted, he is definitely not the easiest of writers. While we may possess the name of the website, we still need a special username and password to enter into the mysteries of which Ibn Arabi speaks. In contrast to Dante's allegorical but highly personal Divine Comedy, the book about which I'd like to speak today, Ibn Arabi's Kitab al-Isfār, takes a radically different approach to the story of spiritual voyaging. This is not simply a matter of a religious difference between a Christian and a Muslim, but of the fundamental approach and vision. But the great question at the heart of both texts is more or less the same. How should one best journey through this life? Bearing in mind that the effect or result of our voyaging will be either our joyful fulfillment and happiness, or our bitter disappointment and misery. Or to put it rather crudely, are we going to end up in heaven or in hell? And what may we come to discover about the mysteries of being human along the way? Now, I'm not going to engage in an investigation of the parallels between Dante and Ibn Arabi. Apart from anything else, I'm not qualified to make more than passing reference. But I wanted to mention this at the beginning so that we can contrast Dante's opening lines with the text by Ibn Arabi that I want to discuss. Of course, we could do the same within the Islamic tradition, but I fear that would plunge us into a very technical discussion of the history of ideas. I want to concentrate more on the highly distinctive and unique perspective of Ibn Arabi on the whole notion of spiritual voyaging or journeying. As the translator Angela Jaffray observes, to say that the writings of Ibn Arabi are difficult is a great understatement. The reader who plunges into this vast and shoreless sea, expecting smooth waters, will be disconcerted to find him or herself buffeted about by increasing waves of disorientation and bewilderment. In short, the reader should anticipate a voyage in which the intellect will prove an inadequate compass and in which the heart alone can serve as rudder. Well, in addition to that, the Kitab al-Isfār is a particularly tricky text, which may reflect the fact that Ibn Arabi himself listed the book as one of 16 that were not yet suitable for public distribution. To get this book into published form in English has taken just about a decade. Not simply translating into English from the Arabic, it's hardly simple, redoing the Arabic text, writing commentary and notes on the text in the light of other Ibn Arabi works like the Futuhat. There have been many, many revisions of text and understanding along the way. In short, a marathon voyage, and I can tell you it's still ongoing as it gets studied. The Kitab al-Isfār was first published in a critical edition 20 years ago with French translation by Denis Gril in 1994. And then later in Italian and Urdu. The English presentation combines not only the understanding that our friend Denis Gril brought to the text 20 years ago, but also a deep reflection by Angela Jaffray herself, who has provided her own commentary on each chapter of the work. The Arabic text itself has been redone. In addition to manuscripts used by Denis Gril, which are now in the archive of the Society, access was gained to a particularly special copy. A copy of the original Arabic text by Ibn Arabi himself, written when he was an old man. This original holograph was conserved in Konya, but due to a theft in the 1990s, we only have access to a digital reproduction based on a microfilm. It has a few pages missing from the beginning, but is otherwise complete and relatively legible. One of his closest students, Ismail ibn Sawdakin, read the text back to the author just 2 months before Ibn Arabi's death in Damascus. This makes it the last known text that Ibn Arabi wrote in his own hand. And bear in mind, the fact that you can even see this image projected here is a prime example of unveiling what is hidden. Access to books such as these has only been made possible for scholars in the last 20 years. So let me start with the title and some thoughts about language. The title, al-Isfār and Nata'ij al-Asfār, literally means unveiling the results or the effects of the voyages. It's not very felicitous in English as a title for a book. So Angela opted for the Secrets of Voyaging, which at least conveys something of the meaning of the book. However, in Arabic, it is a delightful and insightful rhyming wordplay. I suppose we could get the same feel in English with a title like Unraveling the Results of Travelling, but that's really too much like a rap song. The word for unveiling, isfar, is from the same root as asfar, the plural meaning journeys or voyages. And they're identical in writing, apart from one small thing, where we put the tiny mark called the hamza below the line or above the line. Nothing else indicates what the word is apart from that. Now, the notion that unveiling or discovery is linked to movement and travelling is a hugely important one and central to the book and to our discussion today. Voyaging has an effect or a result which is discovered or unveiled in the process of the travelling. So the journey of our life is being portrayed as a voyage of discovery of the mysteries of being and knowing who we are. As we travel along our own individual paths, we're being invited not simply to enjoy the ride, but to uncover or discover its meaning. Now, like other Semitic languages, Arabic has an amazing facility to express through the 3-letter or sometimes 4-letter roots of words a whole range of associated meanings. These are usually derived from a very simple experiential principle or image. In the case of safara, its primary meaning is to sweep or strip away, to remove the covering from something. So wind sweeps away leaves or disperses the clouds. If it means to take away something, it also means to uncover or reveal something. So the wind removes the clouds from the face of the sky. When a woman unveils herself, her face is revealed in all its colour. If I uncover something, I also make it manifest. So the word can be used of a person writing a book, making it appear, or the sun rising, or setting out on a journey by packing all the tents away. All of these are related meanings within the root. Compare that constellational view, which includes unveiling, scripture, journeying, to something in the English language in terms of an etymological root from the Latin or the Greek or the German. For example, voyage, Old French, about 1500, 1300, meaning travel, journey, movement, and was even the word used for a crusade. It comes from the late Latin viaticum, meaning a journey, or in classical Latin, that meant the provisions you take with you on a journey, and that's derived from the Latin via, meaning a road, a journey, or travel. So, in other words, here, a word is what it means. where Arabic is inherently allusive, suggestive, imaginative and poetic, English tends to be linear, analytical, prosaic. Even its poetic quality is usually through association of sound or juxtaposition of imagery rather than inherent in the word itself. Its prosaicness, of course, makes it ideal for the modern technological world. But the imaginative feature of Arabic lends itself to what has been known in our own time as network thinking, which a student of Jung defines as neither linear nor meandering, but associational. It's purposeful. It's also concerned with elaborating a network of expanded meanings derived from a central image. Now, I mention language here for two reasons. First of all, to explain some of the meanings inherent in the title of the book, but secondly, to sound a slight cautionary note that our way of thinking is inevitably bound up with and bound by the language we use. This is why Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world," and why Charlemagne is reported to have said, "To have another language is to possess a second soul." However, let us note that the realm of meaning is in no way limited to the forms that a particular language imposes. It's completely wrong, for example, to suppose that Dostoevsky has to be read in the Russian, or that Ibn Arabi's writing can only be comprehended in the original Arabic. Apart from the fact that such an idea would put all translators out of a job, many Arabic-speaking friends have told me that they absolutely need English translations, such as these, in order to really penetrate a text by Ibn Arabi. And this goes for French translation, Spanish translation, whatever. Whenever it's done into a European language, precisely because the translator is required to spend such a long time fathoming the meaning of a passage, literally deciphering it in order to put it into another language. Translation like this is a sort of voyaging into the unknown, and often finding it to be unknowable at the same time. Of course, all of us here think that going into the unknown is rather appealing if we want to take a sabbatical from the daily grind of work, or travel to a land we've never been to before, or push ourselves beyond our comfort zone by taking on a new challenge, physical or intellectual. We may describe it as voyaging into the unknown or facing the unknown, but actually its primary feature is the excitement of knowing or directly experiencing something new, accessing something fresh in the realm of the known. And given that a work such as the Isfār was inspired into the heart and mind of its author, we are also sharing in the freshness of the descent of that original inspiration by having it transported into English and reading it. The model for such inspiration is the revelation of the Qur'an itself, as Ibn Arabi explains when discussing the third voyage in the book, the voyage of the Noble Qur'an. The Qur'an, he says, descends first as a whole and then in constellational form. In other words, in parts or in chapters. He says it continually descends upon the hearts of servants. And this voyage never ceases as long as tongues recite it, whether inwardly or aloud. In other words, the revealing of the Qur'an by Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad is continued and perpetuated by those who participate in its recitation. Likewise, the inspiration given to Ibn Arabi as a whole is continued and perpetuated by it being read and digested, whatever language it may be in. At its best, the English is not like the original, or an approximation of the original, it unveils yet another face of the original, according to the degree of receptivity of the reader. However, this principle, which Ibn Arabi speaks about in terms of the Qur'an, is far more extensive, because Ibn Arabi views the Qur'an not simply as an external book of revelation, as a form, but primarily as a meaning. He identifies it in the text with the true human being who is the total, or the universal human being. So this meaning or wisdom or reality descends to us, or comes into our heart as a whole, and we then gradually come to realize its full weight piece by piece. Or to put it another way, the template of our fullest humanity, which is represented by the Qur'an as the character of Muhammad, is given to us in totality as potential. And our lives are simply the way that this is played out in time, according to our receptivity. The unceasing descent of meaning has many further profound implications, one of which Ibn Arabi relates elsewhere in the context of his own ascension or miraj, as a teaching from the prophet John, Yahya, who tells him, each person has a path which no one else travels, and these paths are brought into existence through the travelling itself. So we're not simply treading a path that others have been on before. We're not walking on a path already laid out. It is much more like walking on a pristine beach, leaving footprints in the sand as we move. No two journeys can ever be the same. Whatever we might imagine, no one else has ever been or will ever be on the journey that each one of us is making. Since our own selves and our realities are being formed and made manifest through the choices we appear to make as we voyage through life. In other words, we are determining our own end result. And making our reality manifest also means having the veil removed from ourselves so that we gradually see who and what we really are. As Ibn Arabi puts it in relation to the Qur'an as meaning, it descends upon you, from you, in constellational form, by the removal of the veil from you. So as the veils are lifted, the face of one's true being is revealed. One should not imagine, by the way, that there is anything predetermined about such a journey, as if there's some outside divine agency that has eternally decided our fate and we've got no option but to follow. When Ibn Arabi speaks of destiny, he simply means the delineation of our reality within the knowledge of God, but it is a self-delineation. The path of our life is coming into being as we voyage, so that we discover the meaning and joy of our reality as we travel through life. I mention joy because our happiness lies in being fully aligned to what we actually are, in accepting the truth we have chosen as and for ourselves. Whatever we might think, there is actually no limit to our reality. This is also alluded to by Ibn Arabi when elsewhere he tells his reader to plunge into the Qur'an, into the river of Qur'an, and you will succeed in every path that leads to happiness, for it is the river of Muhammad who was a prophet while Adam was between water and clay. This signifies the river of our fullest possible humanity, the river of the perfect human, al-Insan al-Kamil, and plunging into it signifies being in full conscious alignment with its movement. But let us return to the idea of unveiling in voyaging, for our focus is not simply on travelling, but on discovery. Ibn Arabi treats of many questions and profound insights along the way in this book. For example, in the voyage of Adam, he speaks of his, that is Adam's, and by extension every human being's descent from the paradisial realm of vastness and leniency to the relative world of narrowness and obligation. Here we have to act. We are obliged to learn by doing. We are required to accept do's and don'ts. It is a voyage, Ibn Arabi says, from the soul's desire to the knowledge of servanthood. In other words, our inherent longing to satisfy our heart's desire is not at all the whole story. There is a further possibility, only to be discovered in this realm of trial and testing, which can be summarized as an alignment of our will to the divine, so that our desire is known to be identical to the divine desire. That is the knowledge of servanthood that leads to felicity. And in case you think that this is highfalutin metaphysics, let me give you an example. This moment by moment laying down of the path as we travel is precisely how we discover being. Whenever we're attracted to something or choose a certain course of action, we invite this possibility into our awareness and being, and it will revisit us as a thought again and again. This is the basis of habit, a pattern that starts in thought and then becomes lodged within our corporeal body and expressed repeatedly in things that we do. This may be good for us, it may be bad for us. It depends on what we become habituated to and our wisdom. It may be as simple as acquiring a new skill, such as how to use a pen or a computer. It may be something more internal, such as an appetite or a habit of mind. If as a child, for example, I discover an amazing and delectable sweetness for the first time, when I'm given a piece of bread with honey on it, desire for this arises in me. I try to recreate the remarkable newness of that first experience of honey. I start to think of honey and bread whenever I get hungry. And yet, I have no idea of many things. I have no idea of different kinds of honey. As long as I believe supermarket honey to be the best because it's all I've tasted, I have no conception of something better, like honey from the local apiary, or honeycomb, or the special of the special, honey that has been freshly harvested where all the essential oils are still present and have not yet evaporated in their contact with air. Without the development of taste, I will have no discrimination. And in relation to the world, this discrimination, developed through repetition, is necessary to tell us what we enjoy more or less, what we consider to be better or worse. And yet at the same time, as Ibn Arabi often reminds us, there's absolutely no repetition in reality. Every moment is unique. Even if the forms are similar, they're not the same. So we face the great paradox that habitual ways of thinking and doing, which make up so much of our everyday lives, simultaneously cover up and reveal the light of this unrepeatable present moment that we're actually in. This is the paradox found in the efficacy of prayer, where ritual repetition and spontaneous dialogue with the divine go hand in hand. But let's return to the Kitab al-Isfār itself. I'm following Ibn Arabi a bit in this because he says every now and again, this voyage is very long, and if we carry on, there'll be a whole book devoted to it. I'm doing the same sort of thing. So I would like to offer a view of the book which is rooted in its construction. As some of you may be very well aware, the science of number is embedded in Ibn Arabi's writings in fascinating ways, offering an insight into the subject matter by an entirely different means. In the Kitab al-Isfār itself, we find a prologue and 16 chapters, making a total of 17, one of the more important numbers in the Islamic tradition, as it's the 17 prayer cycles that are to take place in the 5 daily prayers. According to the 9th century Persian polymath Jabir ibn Hayyan, known as Geber in the West, sometimes regarded as the father of modern chemistry, the entire material order is based upon 17 in the sequence 1, 3, 5, 8. This comes from the traditional 3x3 so-called magic square centered on the number 5, in which each line and each diagonal adds up to 15. It's known as the Lo Shu Square because it was first known in China, where the year is divided into 24 cycles of 15 days each. It was also very well known in the Islamic world, especially from the time of the Ikhwan as-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, in 10th century Baghdad. Now notice that the square in green, the 2x2 square in the lower left-hand corner, comes to a total of 17. 1, 3, 5, 8. The remaining 5 squares along the top and the right total 28, the number of the moon, the second perfect number, etc. Symbolically then, there is a complementarity between the numbers 17 and 28, reflected in Ibn Arabi's work in the number of chapters plus prologue of Kitab al-Isfār on the one hand and Fusus al-Hikam on the other, so that one might justifiably speak of the Isfār as a kind of sister book to the Fusus. If we omit the prologue, we can see a different numerical principle. The Fusus has 27 chapters, which is 3 to the power of 3. The Isfār has 16 chapters, which is 4 squared, or 2 to the power of 4, or 2 times 2, 4 times. So 2s and 4s are very important. The number 4 is, of course, of huge significance in human culture, as regards the material world particularly. 4 directions, 4 elements, 4 kinds of number, the great tetractys of the Pythagoreans, the 4 sacred scriptures, and so on and so on. Furthermore, when Ibn Arabi classifies the book Kitab al-Isfār in his autobibliography, he gives each of the books a letter sign to designate it. In the case of the Isfār, he marks it with the Arabic letters Ba and Ra. The Ba comes to 2, and the Ra comes to 200, making a total of 202, or if it's the name Rabb, then it's 204. The name Rabb, the Lord, the one who gradually brings to a state of completion by nurturing and nourishing. So we might expect, perhaps, that there is some connection between the numbers 2 and 4 and this book. In the prologue, Ibn Arabi mentions 24 separate voyages, but he only discusses 16 in the actual text. And it's presumably no accident that these voyages, these 24 voyages, echo the numerical value of the word for voyage itself, safara, which is 240. Nor that the plural form, isfar, asfar, should amount to 242. But let's delve a little deeper into the structure of the Isfār. The most obvious one, looking at 16 chapters, is a set of 4 chapters followed by 2 sets of 6. The first voyages of which I'm going to speak in a little more detail, form a distinct unit, a template for all forms of voyaging. They begin with the divine, and it may be of interest to some of you who have not come across this book, that for Ibn Arabi, the voyages begin with the divine voyage, not with human voyages. They begin with the divine and they end with the mystery of what is so special about the true human being, the servanthood, as epitomized by the Prophet Muhammad in his night journey. We might call these four, the voyage of Kemal, of completion or perfection. They are fundamental because they belong to the realm which is beyond effort or efforting, just as the Prophet was carried on his night journey. And it's also interesting that the number 3, the descent of the Qur'an, number 4, vision of the signs, which is basically about the journey of the Prophet in his night journey, specifically take place at night, in other words, in the interior, not the exterior. We then have 2 sets of 6. And these 12 voyages together are like the playing out of that in time. So here, effort, striving, becomes a predominant feature, as can be seen in the voyage of trial that Adam has to accomplish. These 12 voyages are all case studies of prophetic voyages, the highest type of voyaging and models for the rest of us. And as in other books such as Fusus or Abadillah, Ibn Arabi is explicit in the Isfār about the crucial role of prophets as divine human messengers. In this second part of the book, we find a total of 8 prophets mentioned. First of all, a set of 6 chapters linked to 7 prophets, because the last one is Jacob and Joseph. A number, of course, 7 prophets, echoes the 7 heavens. And it ends with Joseph, the paragon of Jamal, of beauty. Then we have another 6 chapters, all linked to a single prophetic figure, Moses, who's of course the paragon of Jalal, majesty. And these final 6 chapters no doubt reflect Ibn Arabi's teaching on the Mosaic nature, because Moses is inherently multiple by actually being in his person the embodiment of the children of Israel, as well as the possessor of the 6th heaven of Jupiter. More generally, this 6-fold structure reflects the special nature of 6 as the first perfect number and the root of every perfect number. Perfect meaning that the sum of the divisors is equal to the multiplication side of it. So 1 times 2 times 3 equals 1 plus 2 plus 3. The second perfect number, by the way, is 28. It's also the numerical value of the letter Waw, which as the last of the letters stands for the perfect human being. And notice that the 6th voyage is that of Idris, Enoch, the prophetic archetype of the pole, or the fully realized divine human. Then of course we have the 6 directions of space. We have the shape that most approximates to the circle, and the remarkable hexagonal structure of honeycomb, which bees begin to build as a circle, and then by warming the wax come to create a set of linking hexagons. These are then filled with honey, just as, Ibn Arabi says, the cosmos is filled with God's compassionate mercy. And so on. One can equally view the book as 4 sets of 4 chapters, or a 4x4, with a temptingly spurious link to our modern 4-wheel drives as a mode of journeying. If we look at the themes which are mentioned in the headings, so the first theme is from the Lord to his servant, The second is from trial, as epitomized by the fall of Adam, and it brings us to guidance epitomized by Abraham. This is like the coming into this world being characterized by distraction, suffering, testing, and coming to guidance. The third four exemplify the return journey, beginning with approach and no turning back, and ending in divine good pleasure, divine satisfaction. The final four focus particularly on the journey of return to created beings, from the voyage of return to the final triumph over evil in the voyage of caution. Finally, I should also mention that there are many other ways to view this book. In the text, Ibn Arabi ends certain voyages with the words, "And God speaks the truth and he guides on the path." This is a Quranic affirmation which appears at the end of sections and chapters in the Futuhat. Here it's found 5 times, at the end of the 2nd, 4th, 9th, 13th and 16th voyages, which might be taken to suggest that for Ibn Arabi himself, the book should be viewed in a totally different way, as 22543. But let us focus on the first 4 voyages. Unlike Dante, who begins his narrative with being lost in a dark wood, Ibn Arabi, as always, begins this treatise with a khutbah, a prologue or address, beginning with the words, "Praise be to God who was in the cloud." Thus, center stage is the divine. This is not simply some pious formula before getting down to discussing the real meat of human voyaging. On the contrary, it is an alignment to the proper order of things. Put simply, if we do not begin from the whole, from the origin of unity, we remain lost in separateness, groping in the dark wood. We have posited a starting point that is illusory. Human voyaging will only make sense within the context of reality, or from the bird's eye standpoint. After a prologue that discusses general points such as the incessant nature of voyaging, the types of voyages, the types of voyagers, the first voyage that Ibn Arabi discusses is not one made by a human being at all. It is the one made by God himself, the voyage of the One itself. The lordly voyage from the cloud to the sitting on the throne, assumed by the name All-Merciful, Ar-Rahman. So we are starting our voyaging through the book with the very reason why there's any movement in the universe at all, why we voyage at all, why the whole process of being and becoming was initiated. Those familiar with Ibn Arabi's teaching will probably at this point summarize this or relate it to the divine saying he often quotes, "I was an unknown treasure and I loved to be known, so I created the creation that I might be known." But here in the Isfār, Ibn Arabi provides a more poetic and detailed picture, one that is hugely dynamic, as its focus is on voyaging as unveiling. So firstly, a voyage from pure potentiality, symbolized by the cloud, to the appearance of mercy as the sole ruler or king of the entire all-encompassing circle of creation, as symbolized by the throne. In numerical terms, it is the voyage of the one out of the great void, a void which we cannot talk about except as an absence of number, a realm which is one of unlimited capacity of imagination before any imaging can take place. It is a voyage, in other words, from zero to oneness. It is loving mercy that caused this voyage. It is loving mercy that appears as the ultimate ruler of all that is to come into existence. In other words, Ibn Arabi is saying, the first thing that God had mercy on was himself. The second voyage is also a divine voyage, a playing out of the implications of the first one, because if there is one, there must be two. Two worlds, creation and command. Two mirror principles, cosmos and human. Two worlds in the form of the unseen and the seen. And at the same time, this is a voyage specifically entailing unveiling, manifesting that which is hidden, displaying the differences between the high and the low. Ibn Arabi says, this is a voyage that unveils its face. It brings to light what every human being contains of blameworthy and praiseworthy character traits. And we might note that this ethical dimension is not a purely individual matter. It's intrinsic to the nature of things. It's only in the light of the divine truth, according to Ibn Arabi, that what is praiseworthy or blameworthy can really be understood. In the third voyage, that of the Noble Qur'an, which I've already spoken about, Ibn Arabi moves on to the implications of difference. That God ceaselessly sends down inspiration as a warning and as an exposition of wisdom. This is not simply a descent of the Qur'an as an external book of revealed wisdom, but as the direct descent of all meaning and all wisdom as depicted in the fully human being, into the human heart. This descent is both whole, complete, as well as fragmentary, constellational, self-completing. The fourth voyage, that of vision in the signs, is expressed as a meditation on the night journey of the Prophet, in particular the first verse of Surah 17. Glory be to him who carried his servant by night from the inviolable place of prostration to the furthest place of prostration, that we might show him of our signs. This voyage centers on vision, vision of divine signs, but then Ibn Arabi says, it confirms the Prophet in his election to the station of love, because he took him as an intimate friend and beloved. And it's clear from Ibn Arabi's discussion that what God loves in the Prophet is himself. For what gives rise to the elevation of the true human being is the full realization of being servant, not as something, but as a nothing. Love, he says, demands jealousy, so there remains no trace of the servant. And yet, the servant, he says, is powerful, and there's no restriction upon him because of his divine identity. So this is a voyage of two lover-beloveds in two places of vision. These first four voyages express the total alignment of the divine order from its highest degree to its lowest, as found within the truly human being. They express an eternal template of all voyaging. On the divine side, a movement of love and of mercy to his own possibilities. On the human side, a movement of servanthood, not as someone with a choice whether to obey or disobey, but simply the complete prostration of the heart to the Lord, without there being any command to do so, and without this signifying anything but the intrinsic act of being human. And in one sense one could say, this is all that has ever happened. God's outpouring of himself into his beloved so that the divine mystery can be known. In many ways, these four voyages express and amplify the same principle that Ibn Arabi puts so succinctly in the opening paragraph of the beginning of his Fusus. The real wanted to see the essences of his most beautiful names, whose number cannot be counted. Or if you like, you may say, he wanted to see his own essence in an all-inclusive created being that encompasses the whole order, because it is qualified by existence, and in which he could manifest his mystery to himself. So in conclusion, what is it that makes this book so compelling? And why indeed should one study voyages made by prophets apparently so long ago? And what does this book have to say to us in the second decade of the 21st century? For some people, the ultimate criterion of a human being is to beautify. That's to say, to make the world a better place than we found it. To contribute, so that the world is better off for us having been in it. But for Ibn Arabi there is really a much greater vision than ideas of our self-worth. He's interested in the reality of our self-worth. He says about this book, all these voyages are only bridges and pontoons that are placed for us to cross over to our own essences and the states that are specific to us. He then goes on in the most explicit fashion in the Isfār to describe what he really means in this book. This is at the end of the 9th voyage, that of approach and no turning back. What I have recounted to you is to remind you of what is within you. And what I've called your attention to is so that you will know that you are everything, in everything, and part of everything. Thank you very much.
Have you found that this, because Ibn Arabi is all about meaning, what's the meaning really of so much work? If that's a subject you'd like to go into.
Do you mean in general terms?
I do mean in general terms, but it seems very particularly pronounced in this book as far as my limited range of Ibn Arabi's works. It seems to be mentioned so often in relation to this book.
Well, as I mentioned, the Isfār, Asfār, this unveiling and voyaging. Now in English, we have a real problem because we're not used to thinking that these two things are the same. They're not different things which have been put together. They're actually arising out of the same thing. They're arising experientially. Now, if we really, really think about our lives deeply, I think we'll all be able to reflect on the fact that it doesn't matter if you travel to India and come back. What matters is what is unveiled to you in the process of that movement. If nothing, then you haven't gone anywhere. So, built into the title of this is something very profound about the fact that as we go through life, we have the opportunity to be discovering. And frankly, I have to say, out of my own experience, I don't take it as often as I could do, nothing like as often as I could do, because I'm not understanding what is actually going on. And I'm too often diverted by habit on the one hand, habitual ways of seeing and doing and thinking, and on the other hand, just sort of pushing something aside that actually has this capacity to unveil something for us. And it may be because I don't like it. And if I say this about myself, I can equally say it about the Prophet. Because the same thing happened to him as an example for us. There was a blind man You remember?
Yeah.
There is a surah which is based on this blind man who came to him. And he turned aside from the blind man. Ibn Arabi says because he knew that all this revelation have come, all of it has come for someone who should be described as seeing. So, how do you interpret seeing? You know, he was shown then, don't interpret it the way you think. It's not physical. It's a total universal principle. So, it's not really an answer to your question except to focus primarily on this very, very, very important central part of this book, that voyaging and unveiling are the same thing. So we talk in English about a voyage of discovery. That's why Angela used that in the title, by the way. And also there are many other words for travelling in Arabic which don't have this flavour. They don't have this idea of unveiling built into them, of discovery, of sweeping away something and revealing something. So, as you know, Ibn Arabi's favourite word, one of his favourite words is tajalli, revealing, unveiling. Well, this is another kind of angle on the same thing.
Thank you.
Anyone else? John.
Yeah, I have had the pleasure of having a look at this book, and that Angela Jaffray really emphasises how in every voyage we are carried. You know, just that idea that we think that we're travelling, but actually in reality we're being carried. And I'm just struck by the tension with that and what you were saying about our determination. And I wonder whether you could comment on that.
Gosh. I don't know. This is the whole, I mean, you've opened up the whole big question about do things happen by grace or because of effort? And that's not a, I mean, he's got huge amounts to say about it, but in the end we have to discover that for ourselves. What is it that, you know, that we have to strive for? One place I've just read recently, we have to strive to unite those who have a right with the fulfillment of their right. So if you've got a cat has a right, and you have to strive to see that the cat receives its proper right. That's giving it its due. Well, it's like that for everything that is within our power, and that includes our faculties, includes our bodies, it includes the food we eat and how we eat. It goes across the board. So we have to strive for this. This is effort. But at the same time, we're given air to breathe. Food, we go into the shop and we pay some money and just get it. No, it's there. And if it wasn't there, people would really seriously complain. So they kind of expect food, this bounty, to be there. So on the other side of all this is this enormous outpouring of bounty. Sunshine, sunlight, rain, etc. that we, living in cities, forget about too often. But without it, we wouldn't be alive. Our bodies would not be sustainable. So it's a dialectic. I don't think it's true. We are being carried, and we're not aware of it. How do we become aware of it? Is that a matter of grace? No doubt.
So just following on from that lady's point, in your talk you mentioned the lack of predestination in the delineated paths that we all lead as human beings, does that hint towards the non-duality or nature of the Lord, in that, actually the divinity of man, in that we actually in our lives create our own destinies in the lives that we lead?
Well, in one sense, if you're crossing a beach and nobody's walked on it before, whatever path you take is yours and yours alone. So be happy with it. You know, if you're not happy with it, why are you doing it? It explains what you are, the path you take. In one sense, you already are that. In another sense, forget that, because it's actually in the doing of it that you're going to discover who and what you are. There's no other way. There's a conundrum. And nothing I can say is going to relieve the conundrum. Thank God.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, actually somebody already touched on the question that the understanding of destiny, and you used the word which I don't understand, which I don't know, is called, I think you said self-delineation. I don't know what that is. I've always wondered whether I understand free will, I think I do, but I have always wondered, especially since I've been in a Sufi path, whether we can create our destiny, or whether it's all already determined by God. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, if you could comment on God's jealousy, because I don't understand it. And the last, I just wanted to,
Easy questions, right?
As far as the title, the word kitab was not translated, and I wanted to know if there's a reason for it, because the Arabic title has the word book, the book of blah blah, and is there, maybe it was important for Ibn Arabi for it to be translated.
I'll deal with the last question first. That's a very interesting idea, because he doesn't always put kitab at the beginning of a book. Mostly he does. I have no idea. I suppose we'll have to go and ask him, find out. All I would say is there's a direct relationship between the root safara and scripture. So al-Isfār also means the scriptures, that which has been written down. So to have it called a book, that's maybe tied into it. Jealousy. Well, I really don't want to say very much about God's jealousy. All I can say is about the Arabic language, which again is very interesting and revealing. The word for jealousy, ghayra, is directly etymologically related to other. So if there is jealousy, there must be other. And if there is other, there must be jealousy. They're hand in hand. Self-delineation, I used the word because I wanted to give a sense of not some imagined archetype that we are somewhere, which has already been imprinted, and we're just kind of the puppets playing out this thing. I wanted to suggest that we are directly involved in the creating of our own lives and happiness and realization. It literally is up to us. Ibn Arabi stresses many times that God deals with us according to what we give him of ourselves. That's the principle. In other words, there's no limit. He doesn't impose a limit upon us and say, now you've got to conform like that. No, that's not how it works. But that's a big topic to study again and again. I would refer you to 2 or 3 chapters in the Fusus, particularly chapter of Ezra, has a lot to do with this.
Any other questions? This lady.
I'll try and formulate this best I can. I liked your talk very much, first of all, and I was struck by a few things, so I thought I'd pick on those. One was you talked about the ever-present now, which I'll come back to. It's in relation to something else I'm just about to say. You talked about the 2 worlds, the duality, the manifest and the unmanifest, or the hidden and the visible. I'm not a scholar, but I also reminded me of the 3 worlds, which was the manifest, the world of command, and you said the world of creation. But then there's also is it the ʿArabi, the pre-eternal, the barzakh? Is it that's also referred to? You know, the in-between, which is quite important, and I just wondered if that's, and I like this quote that you talk about the voyages or any bridges and pontoons, and this sense of one's in this world and one needs to get to the other world, but there's no way to get there. So I wondered if in studying this text there's any real glimpses of what this barzakh, these bridges might be, and in order to kind of this, and I'm also reminded of the Surah 36, I think, in the Qur'an, which is the place where the 2 seas meet, the reference to that, and where the fish becomes alive again. So it's that thing about being alive, being present here, but yet not being here and not, you know, sort of, just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, and if studying the text has given you any more insights about that in your own journey as well.
I think that when Ibn Arabi says here that these voyages are bridges placed for us to cross over to our own essences, he's deliberately saying, look, these look like journeys going on, you know, by somebody else. God's journey. I mean, me? God's journey. He's done this. Adam has done this. So always, always it comes back to, well, what does it mean for me? Where do I stand in that? Do I see, for example, that when he says the first journey of all is the appearance of mercy, of compassionate mercy, as the ruling principle of everything? Well, to see it would be unbelievable. But do we believe it, let's say? Do we take it as an idea that is central to our living? Because if we do, then we've begun to voyage in it. They're not talking about prophets as people out there who did something many centuries, eons ago. He's saying, who is Adam? Have you realized you're Adam? Have you realized you are Idris? Have you realized you are Enoch? Have you realized you're Abraham, etc., etc.? Have you discovered this in yourself? That's what the book is about. In that sense, it's a highly esoteric book. It's for someone completely engrossed on the way, devoted, because all you'll get out of it in the end is pointers to what you are. You won't get anything else. And sometimes it's very abstruse. One can't penetrate it. Fine, leave it. Find something that speaks in the book. Let it work on you. You know, let it work on you. That's the most basic principle of Ibn Arabi's writing. Let it work on you, because there's no way you can understand it or correlate it to other things. No, let it work on you. And sometimes a line will jump out at you. Say, my goodness me, how could it be? How come I didn't see this before? Then you know that you've got a taste of that little insight which is secreted in various places in the book. So this is a very important book. Jane referred to it at the beginning. I feel. And I notice that people who work with it are also finding it tremendously useful book. Tremendously useful. It opens up different insights than they're the same. It's the same thing being reiterated again and again and again, but suddenly in a totally different form and very dynamic, actually very poetic at the same time, and can be very direct. I just say, you know, take the text and work with it. Allow it to work on you. Get to grips with it. It's a treasure trove in there. And it's not like any kind of idea that any of us have about spiritual journey. I can't say any more.
The very nature of books such as this, without wishing to actually compare it to other books, because is it really just a Western thing that we approach books in a certain way? Because I don't really read this book, it's reading me. It's a crude way of putting it, but that seems to be what's happening. It's not a book in what I would have called a book as a child.
Yeah.
And the physics, likewise, the nature of books.
Yeah, well, I touched on it in the talk in the sense of the descent of meaning. Because books, the descent of the Qur'an is the model. It's a book. But it's a book in many senses, not just a tangible physical book. It's a book that allows us to read the book of ourselves. That's it. When you discover you're a book,
Once again, it's the circular.
exactly.
If there's anything else,
Can you take one more? I think we've got time. Bernard, would you?
I need Bernard's representative. I'm just wondering if the presentation you made is not almost ultimately very anthropocentric. If this is really the idea of Ibn Arabi, such anthropocentricity, that we are just called to become ourselves? It's a question.
I mean, in one sense, what else could we become? Maybe we don't know what ourselves means. I like the image that he produces in this book, which is of something given to us in total, but in a place in us where we can't access it except in partial form. As we go through life, we are uncovering, unveiling what we are. And we'll never be able to unveil anything else. Each of us is doing this. And that's not separate from the divine journey either. It's just that we think it is. That's why I said for someone, what he's pointing to is someone who's aligned totally to the divine reality, then their full humanity comes into play. It's like two sides of the same coin. So to give you an example, we attribute to the divine qualities. How? From ourselves we do this. If we say that God is merciful or compassionate, we do it because we find within ourselves something of the meaning of compassion and mercy. If we say that God is generous, it's the same thing. It's because we've witnessed generosity. We have a taste for it. And we are simply saying that the ultimate source of that generosity, the source of that mercy, compassion and mercy, is the divine, because that's all there is. Now, if you call it anthropocentric, or it's also theocentric at the same time, because the anthropos is the image of the theos. I think you can switch between the two equally, like Ibn Arabi does constantly. He says, for example, you are his mirror in which he contemplates himself, and he is your mirror in which you contemplate yourself. Both sides are true. Both perspectives open to us. Thank you for the question.